All right, a few housekeeping items before we begin. Only the panelists are displayed and heard, but we do want to hear from you. Please ask your questions during the webinar using the Q&A button on your Zoom panel, not the chat button. If it's in the chat, we won't be able to see it, so please use that Q&A panel. I will try to interject questions throughout the way as Steve is presenting, but we will have a Q&A session, a dedicated session at the end of the webinar as well. And yes, we will share both a link of the recording and the presentation slides as soon as possible to all registrants after today's webinar. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Raquel Cloyd. I manage business development and partnerships here at Intellect. Our speaker today is Steve Gompertz. Steve has over 30 years of experience in quality and medical technology, including roles at Pelican Biothermal, Abbott, Boston Scientific, Medtronic, and more. He is an adjunct instructor at St. Cloud University in Minnesota, is a Society for Quality Assurance Distinguished Speaker, and an MFES Distinguished Engineer. We're excited to have Steve join us today. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Intellect before we begin. We are an award-winning quality management and environmental health and safety software company built on a no-code platform and powered with a robust AI integration. We help companies to automate quality processes, prepare for audits, and achieve their quality and compliance goals. Some of those goals include achieving and maintaining compliance with ISO, FDA, GXP, ITAR, OSHA compliance, and more. Whether you're in med device, aerospace, automotive, biotech, general manufacturing, many other industries rely on Intellect to reduce operational risk, improve profitability, increase customer satisfaction, and increase increase revenue, excuse me. We have over 30 pre-built applications ready to use out of the box, or you can configure and build out unlimited applications to meet any quality or operational need. If you'd like to see a demo of these or any of our applications, please visit us at intellect.com. You can also type in the word demo into the Q&A button on your Zoom panel, and we will reach out to you as soon as possible after today's webinar. All right, today, Guerrilla tactics. What are our learning objectives today? Today, Steve is going to cover these key points. Hiding the vegetable. If you have ever been the parent of small children, you know this concept, but it's basically how to introduce new concepts subtly. He's going to explain the value in simplifying documentation. That might be antithetical to quality professionals. You think you want to increase documentation and explain things well, but Steve will explain why this is important. He will explain how to foster a culture of quality that supports continuous improvement, and how to make change stick. And you don't need to wait for permission to improve quality in your organization. All right, right before I hand things over to Steve, we'd like to ask you a question. How are you measuring and tracking quality improvement today in your organization? Please check all that apply. We're going to launch the poll. Some of the options, maybe you're currently using paper and clipboards and storing them in binders. Maybe you're using spreadsheets. It's very common. We see that with clients of ours before they move to Intellect. Maybe you have an EQMS in place already, or perhaps you're using other systems like your ERP, an MES system. Please share any of that apply to your organization currently. We're going to give it a few seconds to see if everyone can join us. We've got about half who have participated in the poll already. We will give it a minute here. All right. We're about 70%, just a few more who can answer the question, and we'll share the results. All right, everyone, thank you so much. So here are our results. I'd say, about most of everyone is still using spreadsheets to some extent. We've got about a third between paper clipboards. You have an EQMS, or you have another system where you are collecting data. All right, well, thank you everyone for participating in our poll. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Steve.
Great, thank you very much for the introduction, and I appreciate everybody's time today. I can see we have a very good turnout, so I'm very pleased to see that as well. So just a quick caveat, I'm going to move pretty quickly here today. This is actually the very short version of what is normally a 4-hour workshop that I present. So we're going to be staying at a very high level, and I'm going to cruise through some of the big topics just to kind of whet your appetite for this. But no, there is an ability to get a deeper version of this if you're interested once we get through this. All right. So let's start with first, getting on the same page, right? And talking about, what are the common, challenges that quality leaders or people who are trying to lead in quality run into, right? As you're trying to implement changes and new ideas. There's this one, right? That's always in our way. It's human nature to fear change. And, people just love the challenge, especially if the ideas are not their own. We just, there are people who are comfortable with change, but really, I think most of us prefer things to stay as they are. And if they're going to change, we prefer that it be something that we have, come up with, because then that makes it more comfortable to us. Sometimes the different methods and ways in which you can make improvement are not easy to do. Things like Six Sigma, Lean, they require some training and maybe some certification, and oftentimes organizations will push back on, we don't have time for that. We have a business to run, the time, the resources we're going to need. We're going to need additional people, that because we don't necessarily have the right type of people here. So you'll get these kind of pushbacks going. This is going to be too hard, for us to take on, in addition to everything that we have to do as a business. Oftentimes, what you want to propose, the changes you want, represents some risk. And then it's always a challenge to get the people above you who get to make decisions, whether they're willing to take that same level of risk that you're willing to take in your career, right? The higher up you go in the organization, the price of failure tends to get worse. And so it can be tough. They may understand what it is you want to do and why you want to do it, but they are kind of going, I'm not signing on for that. So we need to figure out how to get past that as well. And then even when you do get people who are going, absolutely great idea, let's do that, but let's add this on, or let's, instead of doing it that way, let's do it this way, right? And suddenly, again, back to that idea of they don't like ideas that aren't their own, and they want to suddenly mold it in their own image, right? And they're taking it away from what you had in mind. Sometimes pretty dramatically, I've run into to where it really doesn't even represent what you were originally trying to get to. So you get this sort of interference that occurs, in the guise of, yes, we agree with you, but we're going to do it completely differently, sort of approach. So I can't see everybody. I hope there's some nodding heads going on here, that people recognize at least one or more of these as the challenges you face in getting things done. So the concept of guerrilla tactics, right? And I did choose the name to be a little bit provocative here, get people's attention. If you look up a definition of guerrilla, you'll find something like this: a person who engages in irregular efforts, typically against larger regular forces, right? And those tactics then refer to the actions and activities performed mostly in an impromptu way and often without authorization. And that's really the gist of what I want to, cover today, is those ways in which you can lead without formally being the leader or having that permission to move forward. It requires you to be thinking differently. We get stuck, I think, in some of these old common approaches or just what we've known before that we get comfortable with, right? And really, to make things change, you have to, rethink how you're doing things. And I've always liked this quote: if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. Right? Which was actually coined by a psychologist, Dr. Jesse Potter. Often you'll see this online, and it's always attributed to Einstein or Tony Robbins or Henry Ford, as most quotes online are. But it was actually Jesse Potter. She was the first one to say this. She was presenting at a conference and made this comment, right? But she's right. You've got to step to a different side, get a different perspective on things, and really change your mindset, right? You could also use, right, we know that old definition of insanity, right, which is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. It's that kind of changing that we need to think about. So the first thing is, as I said, right, people hate change. So maybe there's a way to make change and not, let people know that you're making the changes. And this is where I refer to hiding the vegetables as the way to get to this. There are quotes out there, right? That, again, that idea that people just in general don't like change. This one from Richard Hooker: change is not made without inconvenience, even when they know or understand that it's from worse to better. And a similar quote from Arnold Bennett: any change, even a change for the better, is always accompanied by drawbacks and discomforts, right? Change is hard regardless, right? Even when everybody's on board, it's changed. It creates stress. Things are not the same, and you have to address a number of variables to make sure it goes correctly. So what is it that drives this, right? Why is it that people are so afraid of change? Oftentimes there's a fear of loss, right? You're giving something up. People often define themselves and their roles and their power, right? Their strengths, their value to the organization and what they're currently doing today. And if what you're going to propose is going to take that away from them, they have trouble seeing, where will I get that new sense of value going forward? This thing I've been doing, is mine. I'm the expert, or, I'm the king or queen of this part of the process. And now you just said that's going to go away, right? So there's a personal aspect to it. There's the burden, right? Well, wait, that's going to just make my job harder, right? Now I have to do something, more advanced, more complex, or there's some steps now that I have to do that I didn't have to do before. So why would I want to do that, right? They can't see the bigger picture. Well, overall, this may be shortening cycle times or reducing errors or something like that. That's better for the organization as a whole. But all they know is they have to do something different and additional to what they've always been doing. Sometimes they just don't see the picture, right? You haven't successfully given them the vision and helped them understand what exactly is going to change and what's the pathway to get there, right? If they might understand, all right, I see where you're trying to go, but I don't understand the method you're going to use to get there. And so that they start to get uncomfortable, right? With, I don't know if I can back you on that because I don't understand the path you're going to take to get us there. Or if you've not really laid out the vision, then they're going, I understand the path, but where's it we're going on this? This doesn't make any sense to me. Similar to the loss, right? There's the fear of that I won't have the competence going forward. All right. Today they're good firefighters at whatever they do. They've figured out how to work through whatever manual processes are there. Now you're going to automate it, and they still have a role there, but now they have to think about different things. Maybe there's new technologies, right? New methodologies in place. And they're just not sure that they're going to be strong enough, or how quickly will it take them to get good at this, if ever, right? And they go, I know what I'm doing today. I've been doing this for years. So, you hear a lot of that getting locked into what they've been doing for a long time drives a lot of this. And then, as I alluded to on the slide about the challenges, the idea that it's, well, wait, you didn't ask me, right? So this couldn't possibly be a good idea because I'm the one who does this, and you didn't ask me for my opinion, right? And there is some truth to that, right? If you're not involving the people who actually know the process that's about to change, you know you're going to run into this problem, and there is a chance that maybe you're missing something important that they could have added to it, but you have to be aware of that, right? People take ownership of things, and if and personalities come into play, and pride, and ego, and all those kind of things. So you do have to watch for that. So those are all the things, right, that get in your way, and that's part of why people don't like change. So back to the idea then, okay, can we do this without letting them know we're making a change, right? And I use the example up in the pictures. I'm okay with zucchini, right? If I order something at a restaurant and my side is zucchini, I'm going to eat some of it. Okay. But you know what? You put that zucchini into bread and give me some butter, I'm going to make it disappear. Right? That's the much preferable method. And I'm not even going to think about the fact that there are vegetables in that bread. I just enjoy the taste much better than sauteing them. Right. And as Raquel mentioned, right, if you raise kids, this challenge of how to get them to eat things that don't look right or don't smell right or whatever, that are actually good for them. So, one of the ways in doing this is, maybe you don't have to actually call whatever you're doing by whatever it's supposed to be called. And I use Six Sigma a lot as examples because most people are familiar with that term. You want to get Six Sigma in place, and you're getting pushback about what it's going to take and the formality it adds, or whatever the barriers are that people are going to pop up. Well, do you have to call it Six Sigma? Can you just start building in some of the practices and methodologies and not really tell them what it's called? It seems like such a simple thing, but it can actually go a long way to just don't call it the thing that they fear. Just call it anything else, or don't call it anything. Just say we're making a change. We're going to try this as a step in how we do continuous improvement. And and you don't have to call it value stream mapping, or whatever the other tools you want to implement from Six Sigma. Just find some other way to just call it something or call it nothing that won't raise that concern up. Because otherwise, as soon as they hear the words that they recognize, they have their preconceived notions. If they've ever been through, an initiative like this before, then they bring back those experiences. And if they were negative experiences, right, then now you've got another battle to fight here that you shouldn't really have to worry about. When you're writing procedures, like I said, you can just start to build some of this stuff in without telling anybody what it is. You can emulate the workflow you're looking for. And again, Six Sigma or lean practices, 5S. Again, you don't have to call them those things, but as you start to make changes to procedures, work instructions, you could build those steps into the workflow that emulate exactly what, if you're a black belt, you got to do it this, but now you don't have to tell anybody that's what they're doing, right? So just put it right in there in plain sight. But again, it just looks like another change, and they start to think about the change. Oh, that makes sense to do it that way without tying it to something else that's going to create a bias. If whatever you're trying to do, requires certain types of data analyses, you don't have to tell people what you're going to do necessarily, right? You could just start structuring forms to collect the data that you need or in the format that you need without showing them necessarily the final version of that, right? Which can freak them out. If anybody's familiar with QFD and a house of quality diagram, I would never want to show that to people who've never really done that kind of exercise before. Google House of Quality if you're not familiar with it. It's this horrendous looking matrix, and you will definitely scare people, right? If that's what you say, here's what we're going to do. There's a lot of real value in using that kind of tool in the right situations. But if you were to show that to the uninformed, the people who aren't knowledgeable in it yet, you're going to lose them pretty quickly, right? So you want to just sort of build this stuff into the stuff they are comfortable with, and then you can draw out what you need in order to create. You can go create your house of quality diagram on your own, but at least now you collected the data you needed to get that. And then sometimes maybe it is hide very much in plain sight, and so some of the terminology can start to appear in these documents, the procedures, the instructions, titles of things, field names on forms, things like that, so that they start to understand the terminology. Maybe they didn't, you didn't call it by its full name, but the pieces you're showing them that, right? And that just starts to become part of the norm, and they become very comfortable. Then later, when you say, well, here's what we're going to be doing, and they go, oh, I recognize that. My own journey in this, I didn't come up with the hide the vegetables things. I learned it from somebody else. Started a new job and as a quality engineer, and I had to do my first CAPA, corrective action, preventive action. And so I went through the training, and then I pulled up the form that I had to use, and I start filling out the form. And there's a lot going on in the form, but as I'm going through, and by the way, the highlighting is here in yellow was not on the form. But I went through it and went, part one, I got to identify myself and, some background information. Then they want me to define the issue. Okay, that makes sense, and then I go to part three, and they said, okay, measure, give me some data here that shows you how you measured the issue scope. And I went, okay, we defined and we measured. Well, that sounds kind of familiar to me. And then all of a sudden, part four is analyze. You analyze the investigation results. And then 5 is improve. And I went, wait, DMAI, this is DMAIC, this is Six Sigma, if I'm not mistaken. So I went and I found the guy who had put this together, who was responsible for these changes. And I knocked on his door and I said, hey, I'm doing my first cap. And, I don't know, maybe it's me or maybe I'm nuts, but has this thing got like a Six Sigma approach built into it? And he like went, shh, no, don't say that out loud. Nobody's supposed to know that. He was running into these problems where, the powers that be were kind of saying, no, we're not going to take on a Six Sigma approach to everything because of all the things I said before about costs and time and, the type of resources we need. So he says, so I'm just hiding it. And I'm slowly teaching everybody the DMAIC approach without telling them that I'm teaching them the DMAIC approach. And he says, I figure after I've done this for about a year and a half, 2 years, then I can go back to introducing a proposal to get into Six Sigma more formally. And when they ask me to describe, well, what does that mean? And I tell them and they go, wait, you mean that thing we already do? Yes. Right? And they're already comfortable with it. So I thought that was just a brilliant approach on his part because people were talking in these terms without necessarily realizing that they were learning Six Sigma in the process and being groomed to, become, belted Six Sigma experts in the future. All right. So next we get into measuring, right? We all know, data and having, good information is key to getting things done. We've probably heard a lot of these kind of quotes before. In God we trust, all others bring data, often attributed to W. Edwards Deming, and he never said that. This one, without data, you're just another person with an opinion, also attributed to Deming, and also he never said that one. And then this one, where there is fear, you do not get honest figures. That actually is what Deming said, and is probably the father of these other versions, kind of that. But there's right, you need data, right, to be able to show, right, how are we going to know how we moved from point A to point B and what did we achieve, and then how do you get that data without getting it biased, right? And there are fears that will occur, in the methods you choose to get that information. You've got to be careful because those who are going to have to provide that data are often going to perceive that they're being measured rather than the process is being measured. You walk in and say, "Oh, I need you to start recording some information about what you're doing," and all I hear is the "you," right? You could explain at that point, "Oh, I'm trying to make this process more effective, more efficient, reduce errors, improve cycle time, whatever," but you're talking to a person and that person is the one being asked to provide that data, and they realize this is about my work. You're measuring me, right? At the end of the day, that's going to reflect on me, and that creates some potential for you not getting good data as a result of that. There's also being, perceived as a burden. You walk in there and go, "Hey, in the middle of all this other busy work you do, I need you to take a step back and measure this and record this," right? You've got to remember these people who participate in processes now, you probably have other objectives and metrics they have to meet. And so if you're going to walk in and somehow mess with their objectives, right, the things they're measuring already, that's not going to go over well. So you need to think about how can I do this in the most unobtrusive way possible. And then again, you can easily skew the results by the methods you choose. Just being people just being aware that the measurements being taken, one, can either create distractions because now you've changed the flow of the work and you take them out of their rhythm that they've gotten used to. And so that could create errors that normally would not be there, right? Now you've skewed the data. Or because they know they're being measured and they're worried about that they personally are being measured, then suddenly perfection appears for a period of time, maybe while you're doing the measurement, and so now the process looks better than it actually is, right? And you're sitting there scratching your head going, "I was pretty sure there were problems in this process, but everything looks great. I guess there isn't anything that we need to improve there." All right, so you can go in either direction, where either you can cause a worse condition or you can create a more perfect condition just by virtue of coming in to collect some data. And then there's always whether or not your method is even the right one, right? We have this concept of test method validation, which too often gets skipped because we think we have a logical way to measure something. And so that's what we go with. And then later you find out, "Gee, this doesn't seem right." And you realize, you know what, that wasn't really the right tool or the right approach or the right analysis method because it's not statistically valid, or we just used the wrong tool, right? If I want to trend the thickness of a very thin item, using a wooden ruler is probably the wrong method. I want a caliper or something more accurate.
Steve, we have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. So the question is, it is easy to gather data in the lab, for example, but when trying to continuously improve quality processes such as document collaboration, validation review, et cetera, where there's a lot of gray area and variation and not a lot of hard data, do you have recommendations on identifying what you can measure?
Okay. Oh, so this didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, because I said, well, next slide, I'm going to talk about how do you overcome some of this stuff. But that last piece, I think, was the important one, right? What can you measure? Yeah, right. Because there's always that pushback of, "Oh, well, that can't be measured or it can't be measured accurately." I'm not a fan of those pushbacks. I actually, I've taken some training from another consultant named Tom Gilb. He's well known in the software arena. Um, and he was always very adamant about that everything can be measured, everything can be quantified. It may not be perfect, but even he always says, an imperfect measurement is better than no measurement at all, because then you're just left with assumption, right? So he said, you might as well try something, figure out something you can measure about it and go with that. And maybe it's an iterative process that helps you then. All right, now we see it at a very gross level. All right, well, it doesn't quite tell us everything we need, but we understand it a little bit better. And now maybe the way to measure it more accurately starts to become more clear. So I just think there's always an opportunity to think about some way to measure things. Gilb is also funny, sometimes provocative as well. That he said, right? If you're going to say that if you're going to declare that there is no way to measure something, then you've declared yourself as the end all be all expert in that topic. In his mind, somebody figured this out. You just didn't find it yet. So go see if somebody else has already come up with a way.
Thank you.
All right. So what do we do with those kind of challenges, right? That can skew our data. It seems so obvious, right? But engage the people that are in the process. And I kind of talked about this for addressing fear as well. Guerrilla tactics, right? They create allies. They get the villagers to come on their side, right? By integrating themselves into the community, right? And not walking in there and going, "Hi, I'm here to fix your process," right? That they probably don't realize needs any fixing or don't agree needs any fixing, right? So it's a more subtle approach. Does this take time? Yes. And I know sometimes we're in a rush. Now, obviously, if there's a high risk issue going on, you're going to move this along quicker. But if you're just in the, doing continual optimization, continual, improvement, it is meant to take some time and be iterative. And, developing these relationships is an important aspect, right? It starts to build your credibility. And it also gets you out of that thinking that you're the smartest person in the room, right? Because you can sit there and think, well, I have the engineering degree and I understand process, mechanics better than anybody else, or capability and variance and things like that. Go down and actually talk to the people doing the work, start to understand what their mindset is, how they do the work. It's great to have assumptions or hypotheses, but we all learned the scientific method in grade school, right? And the next step was, don't just pat yourself on the back because you came up with what sounds like a great hypothesis. Now go confirm it, right? And you can do that simply by talking to the people or observing the process. And that's kind of the next thing, is understand the battleground and surveil the battleground ahead of the battle. Watch the process being performed. Now, I always say, be careful about, being stealthy, right? You don't want to seem like you're spying, but sometimes, again, right, you don't want to influence the observation, so you might have to be somewhat stealthy. Just don't get caught. I had that happen to me once, and that set me back by several months. But you want to figure out, are there ways in which I can observe the process without being observed myself? And that's maybe looking at whatever data is available from that process after the fact, right? Or being able to, see it from afar, location wise. You need to think about, how do I get creative about watching the process so that I don't influence what happens there? And then, data is really important, but be careful that sometimes the data doesn't tell you everything you need, right? That you can sit there again. Is the right data being taken? Is it being taken in the right way? Are you analyzing the right way? And sometimes the visual methods will far defeat anything you could get out of a spreadsheet, right? And any kind of data that was collected from the process. I usually have a gazillion stories, but for time, I'm just going to tell this one. We had an issue with the process, and the data was showing us that there was a problem with the process. The fill weight on an object was critical item, and suddenly the fill weights were going outside the tolerances to the low end. And we sit down and we watch. The process looked exactly as documented. They were doing it the way they said they were. We sat people down and went back through the process. Is that what you're doing? You're doing it? Nope, we're not doing anything different. That's exactly how we do it. But all the data said there's something wrong in the process. And what happened was, over time, as we built up a rapport with the operators, one of my quality techs, having lunches with them, just talking with them, right? Normal kind of stuff. They started to trust him more. And then he started to say, could I like turn on video on my phone and just, we can use it for training if nothing else. Right. And they started to say, sure, I could do that. And of course, when you do that, you build in the perfection, right? That they're going to do it right. And then eventually he got to a point where he asked if he could just leave the camera running for a while. And they were now comfortable enough with him to allow that. And we recorded like 3 hours of video of this operation. And then we got ourselves some pizza and we sat down in a conference room and we watched the video. And of course, at the beginning, everything is being done exactly the way the procedure is supposed to be, but the numbers are good that we're seeing. We compare the numbers coming off that. And then at some point, as we're all sort of getting, tired, my quality tech goes, wait, roll that back, roll it back. I want to see what he just did. And sure enough, we found there was a point where they had reversed 2 steps. It was very subtle, but that was what we were looking for. And what it was is the step required them to pick the object up that they just filled. And when they squeeze it, they're squeezing liquid out of the top and they're just wiping that away instead of replacing the lost amount of liquid. And that's why the weights were down. But we wouldn't have caught that in any other way other than to have over time this ability to see the process in real time. All right, then that idea of not being a burden. Okay, again, if your method for gathering data is going to be a distraction or is going to add time to a process where they're probably, having to fulfill cycle time or they got to produce 1,000 widgets a day or whatever. You have to be wary of those goals and go, how am I not going to mess up their existing goals and measurements to get my own, right? Look for things like automation. Is there something that's available that we could automate? Either do we purchase something like, can we add on a vision system, a low-end vision system? We had another operation, again, it was based on weight. And when we talked to the equipment manufacturer, they said, well, we do, have an add-on scale that just adds onto the machine, and as things roll across the line, they automatically get weighed and gets recorded in a spreadsheet. Okay, that's pretty easy. That doesn't change anything. They're going to have to slide it. The objects slide down the line anyway. They're just building a scale into part of that line. And as it goes across the scale, it grabs that information, right? And it wasn't like particularly expensive add-on. It was something we could add, really easily. And then nobody could say, oh, you're interfering with my process. But again, what are the tools, right? There are some basic quality tools that are meant for this. If you're familiar with check sheets, right? Rather than going, well, I need you to take a measurement and I need you to write down exactly what that measurement was and fill out this sheet with 7 columns of numbers versus can I give you something that already has ranges and you just need to put a check mark, right? Oh, yeah, we measured it. Here it was within these values and we just check, right? And now I can get kind of either a Pareto chart or a histogram, but I can do some analysis of that and get something really value out of it. I mentioned the idea of video cameras. There are other ways to be creative about collecting that data so that you don't interfere or bias what's going on. And then the last one that often gets overlooked is checking to see if there is already data that you can use. A lot of times, machines or whatever are already collecting information, they're counting things, or people are already recording certain information. And kind of like we talked about earlier about, what can be measured, maybe not shooting for perfection first. Let me take what I've got and see what it tells me. Start at a higher level. Oh, look, we are getting some interesting information. Maybe that helps me constrain the problem a little better. Part of testing my hypotheses, right? And figure out, am I even looking in the right place? Because that happens a lot too. We make an assumption about where the root cause lies, and we start measuring in the wrong place and then realize actually it's not at the end of the process, it's at the beginning of the process, and we're not even collecting data there to see what's going on. So don't ignore, right, again, that not invented here syndrome. Don't feel like if I'm going to do this, it has to be data that I collected. There is other data that others have collected or the machine or whatever. Let's start with that. Let's see what we've got and start to confirm our hypotheses. All right. Any other questions pop up so far, Raquel? Are we good?
Nope, we're good.
All right, because I know I'm kind of zipping along here. All right, let's talk about this idea of if it's documented less, it's more likely to happen. So we know what happens with procedures over time, right? some sort of non-conformance happens, a kappa happens, right? We got to add, we add more detail and more detail and more detail because we like quality control, right? And we feel that the more prescriptive a procedure or work instruction or a form is, right, then we're going to address things that have gone wrong before. Now, hopefully they can't happen again. But the reality is, if you're producing something akin to War and Peace, people don't want to read it, and they won't, and they certainly won't go back to it, to use it as reference. They'll go off of what they took from it and from their memory from that point, because it's just too big a beast to go back to. And so you actually start creating a situation that is contrary to what you're trying to achieve. So, right, there's that question, is more prescriptive detail really the way to reduce whatever variances and deviations you've already encountered? Okay. Sometimes no. The more details are provided, the greater the opportunity is for people to forget them or to do them wrong, right? Before, there were 3 things they had to remember. Now they have 5, right? So you've just increased, right? You've just greatly increased the percentage of probability that they're going to miss a step, because now there are more steps or more requirements to meet than there were before. So that might not be the best approach, to just keep adding on and making this bigger and bigger. And then there's the whole language barrier thing. I think we've got people from all over the planet attending today. And every once in a while, I'm going to probably slip in, a term here that I know really well, but others are not going to understand the idiom or, the slang term that I use. So yeah, what happens when your process participants do speak different languages or just have different education and experience levels, right? Might not, okay, great, they're all English speakers, but some of them are only high school educated, some are college educated, somewhere in between, some have gotten certifications. They're all going to understand it at a different level, right? Where are you going to write for? Right? There's always that thing, right, that they tell you when you're taking writing classes, write for a 7th grade level, right? The problem is, for someone who maybe English is a second language, and for some of us for whom English is a first language, we might not actually be comprehending at that level. I did work at a place and they were seeing a lot of errors. And so they went out and kind of did a check to see what kind of reading level everybody was at. And it turned out that the average reading level was 4th grade. We're writing for, I'd say our documents were written for 10th and above, right? And it wasn't that these were dumb people. It was just English was a second language. So of course their comprehension was lesser than somebody for whom English was a first language. And yet we're writing these highly technical procedures that now they really don't have the ability to understand the details on.
Steve, we have a question that just popped up. So this is on this topic. How do you determine the limit or line between simplification and allowing areas for exploitation through loopholes?
Yeah. So I'm going to get to this on the next page, on the next slide, actually. So what do you do about this? But part of it is getting out of the traditional thinking, right? Because what we've been talking about is adding more words and more words and more words. And what I'm going to get to on the next slide, just to kind of steal my own thunder, is maybe it's not about words. Are there other ways to present this information that would be more clear and take away some of these opportunities, right? And I just had a sub slide there. I think about the last time you bought something that was made overseas, right? And how is the translation of the instructions? And you can see, so forget about all the people's ability to understand. There's the ability to translate well, also that creeps in. I used to manage a translation department at a company, and oh my gosh, it's so much more complex than you'd imagine to do translations, and then get into the variability of people's comprehension levels. All right, great, Steve. What is all this? So let's take a look at 2 examples here. These are 2 doc control procedures, and I know I can't see what you're going to say, but which one would you rather be taught and have to use? Right? The traditional, lots and lots of words, every one of them is numbered, right? More detail, more detail, more detail. Or the one on the right, which gives us a flow diagram and a little bit of summary text of what's going on in each activity, and then some links to other spots in the document where there's more detail if needed. Okay. If we were going to raise hands, like I said, I suspect everybody's going to point to the one on the right, because we tend to be more visual learners. And we tend to want to just jump back into a document, get a piece of information, and get back out and do what we were doing. Raquel, what do you got?
We had a question here. So what about, I guess, your opinion on procedures with sketches and drawings only?
I'm a big fan, actually, and that's kind of where I'm going with this next. Yeah, I think the flaw in our thinking is words. That you want to reduce that as much as possible. So what's on the right is what I typically introduce to my clients when I'm consulting. Um, Auditors love it. The readers of the document love it. I've yet to have anybody come back and go, I don't understand what you're showing me here. Usually they come back and go, thank you. I can understand this. I can find what I need and not miss things that are important, right? So yeah, this idea of too long didn't read. Fewer words, whatever you can use, pictures, diagrams will always convey things, in a better way. Now, some things you go, yeah, there's a bunch of detail I need there, right? Again, how do you present information? Do you really need paragraphs? Or would it be bullets or even tables, right? Where people can look up something, right, on a matrix and go, there's what I need right there, right? This is one situation, here's my other, and here's the answer where it comes together. I didn't have to read through all these paragraphs, try to remember what I just read and put it all together and go make a decision, right? You showed me there. And as the question kind of alluded to, what if you didn't use words at all, right? Video, voiceover. I've worked at several organizations and with several organizations that have moved in this direction, as tablet, costs have come way down, where the ability just to have, a computer and a screen at every workstation, uh, you know, recording on video the process and allowing people the ability to then go back to snippets of that video and going, how do those two parts go together? Let me pull that back up. Oh, I see how they did it. Okay, now I remember, right? And I remember which tool to use. Um, it it goes over really well, particularly when you're in an environment where you have a lot of, ESL employees, um, you know, particularly those whom English is very new. It's really problematic to give them anything with any sort of words, especially in a high tech environment. Uh, Providing them with something like video, or, all right, well, we'll present you with the text, but we can provide voiceover and then native speakers can provide it as well. All right, that kind of thing. You can think outside the box and get these very non-textual approaches in place that don't miss any of the details that you're so concerned with. It can be right there. Again, I wouldn't say, all right, you got to watch a 20-minute video. I'd want to say, I'm going to take 20 minutes of video, and then I'm going to figure out what are the logical breakpoints and go, here's 30 seconds or 15 seconds that I know people are likely to keep asking about. And over time, right, as you see the kind of questions you get, or your data tells you where they're making mistakes, you can zero in, okay, we want to put this 15-second clip available to people every time they perform this operation.
Question for you, Steve.
Yep.
How would revision control impact? Because it can be difficult to mark up the video when moving to the next revision.
Yeah, markups are a little difficult in video. But as I note in these sub bullets here, video would be considered a form of documentation, and so it should be controlled. ISO 9001 in 2015 moved to the term documented information instead of documents and records. And, again, when you hear the word document or documentation, you need to get out of the thinking of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. There's nothing in any regulation or standard that says thou shalt fit this on an A-size piece of paper. Documentation is, like I said, it's documented information. I usually explain it to my students as documents are just a structured compilation of information. The format is irrelevant if you find a way, whether it's a PowerPoint or a picture or a video or a website. Those are all forms of documentation. And yes, you can do version control on them. Now, things like markups, yeah, I don't know exactly how you do red lines on a video. But then again, that's why you want to figure out, how do I get them down into shorter snippets? Because then, right, I don't want to have to go re-record a 20-minute video because I changed one step. I want to re-record that 15 seconds, right? And I could describe that in the change description. All right, we're back to words, I get it. But within that process, we can describe, look, I need this part of the video this 15 seconds to be changed because we changed the tool. And so we need to shoot another 15 seconds of people using that tool instead of the old tool. It can be done.
Question about ISO compliance, specifically ISO 13485. Are
Mhm.
videos accepted for that standard or any other standards it would impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's pretty much the space I work in 95% of the time. And so all of these things I'm talking about have been done in an ISO 1345 FDA inspected environment. And yeah, as long as you demonstrate control, again, 1345, 21 CFR Part 820, that's med device regulations. Nothing in there says thou shalt have an A-size sheet of paper. Okay? And they don't tell you whether to use tables or paragraphs. They just tell you you have to convey information and you have to then demonstrate by monitoring your processes that your processes are effective as a result. So you get the choice to how you're going to make that work. And if you can defend that, it's fine. And I've been in those inspections and audits and it has gone over just fine.
Great.
So it's key. They'll tell you this in good presentation skills. They'll tell you this in good writing. Remember, the reader is important, not the author. So you've got to know, what does the reader really need out of this information? Traditional, right? Anybody pulls up a SOP, you can almost guarantee you know what the first 5 sections are going to be. There's going to be purpose. There's going to be scope. There's going to be definitions, reference documents, maybe the revision history will be in front of the document. There's all this sort of administrative stuff. Ask the readers, why are you reading the document? Are you reading the document to see the definitions? No, there's something in the process that they want to get to. Okay. One of my bosses, he was not one of my best bosses, but the one really good thing I learned from him, I was developing a policy document for him, and I'd done the traditional sections, right? And he came back to me, he says, well, it's all good, but he said, what do you think is the most important part of this? And I said, well, it's the section with the actual policy information in it. He goes, yeah. He goes, so why doesn't that appear until page 5? And I was like, just deer in headlights going, oh, that's a really good question, right? If that's the most important part, why is it so far into the document? You got to think about what's of value to the reader. Purpose usually still provides, right? You want people to pull up a document and go, well, am I in the right document? Scope. Does this actually cover me, which is where roles can get in? And then the next thing should be the procedure itself or the policy or whatever it is that they need. Everything else, reference documents, definitions, the revision history, that could be in an appendix in the back. They'll know it's there. If they need it, they'll go there, but don't interrupt their reading of the thing they really need. What do you got, Rico?
Got a question for you. With most procedures, a key is documented evidence of knowledge. Have you developed any other adaptations in your approach when it comes to that topic?
Oh, that's like a whole nother talk about how to demonstrate that your resources are competent and proficient. How can I do that in a nutshell? Okay, so I'm going to say something. I often say things that are controversial and maybe a little bit heretical. You have to remember, when it comes to demonstrating the competence and the proficiency of your resources, nothing in the standards and the regs says that you're supposed to measure those resources. And actually, that's the wrong approach. And we often do that. We give a quiz, right? All right, we're going to take you through training on a new SOP, and then we're going to give you a quiz about it. That doesn't tell me you're proficient or competent. It just tells me you paid attention, during the last hour or whatever we sat in a classroom. You get that information by measuring the process and seeing how the process changes because of the training, right? And if it doesn't get better or doesn't stay the same, if it gets worse, then maybe people aren't being very proficient in the change. Like I said, this is a big topic. I like this topic a lot. I do talk about it in some of my other workshops in more depth. But in a nutshell, you need to rethink, right? Do we learn anything by measuring the people, or do we learn something by measuring the process within which they participate? And then figure out, what did that mean for our training effectiveness? I hope that got somewhat what you needed in the question. I know it didn't go very deep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and my other heretical thought, right? Always write for your readers. Don't write for the auditors. I get it. A lot of you are probably in regulated businesses, and that's all we like to talk about is FDA or whatever agency it is that's going to ride herd on us. And I always remind people, The auditors don't work where you work. They're not part of your company. Yes, they have power. They are important, but you're not, and even they would tell you, they're not for them. They are for the people in the process. So you write for them and then you explain it to your auditors and your inspectors. And the problem is we often don't understand what the auditors want anyway. Right? We tend to make broad assumptions based on fear and biases and what somebody taught us anecdotally. And we don't realize, no, that's not really what FDA was hoping we would do. It's what we assumed they wanted from us. And that's what we wrote for. And we ended up with something that doesn't really work well for our readers, but it might make the inspector happy. That's the wrong approach. So I get into that in the longer version of this as well. But all right. So how about an example? Think about your company's quality manual if you have one. How big is your quality manual? I probably should have done this as a poll, but usually when asked, there are people that have, you see 80 pages, and some people go 80 pages, and I go, I've seen a lot of 80 pages. Actually, the biggest quality manual I've encountered is 137 pages. Okay? I'd probably say the average I see is somewhere between 20 and 30 pages. To me, that's still a pretty big document, right? Now, if you're familiar with the requirements around quality manuals, right? How many requirements does your quality manual satisfy in something, in whatever standard you're complying with? All right, well, it's a trick question if you're ISO 9001, because 9001 no longer requires you to have a quality manual. But since somebody brought up 1345, if you're in med device and you're certified to 1345, okay, it's 4 requirements. And that's what it used to be in 9001 as well. Just 4 requirements. And I actually had this happen in an audit. Auditor walked in, and of course, the first thing they say is, can I see your quality manual? And I slid a 39-page quality manual across the table to him. And he picked it up and he did sort of that old professor thing, weighing the paper to see what the grade should be. And he kind of just held it in his hand, and he looked across the table at me and he said, how many requirements are we satisfying? Right. He's like, and I said 4. And he goes, and it takes this much paper for you to explain how you're meeting 4 requirements. That's the trap we get into. We overthink these quality manuals, and we overthink a lot of documents because of our assumptions about what we think the auditors may want. And it has nothing to do with what really the intent of the requirements are and what your readers need, right? So I'm fighting against the idea that you don't need 20 plus pages to satisfy 4 requirements. I would challenge a 15-page document. I'd challenge a 10-page quality manual. Now people are probably going, wait, you're getting way too low. But it raises that question, how small could a quality manual be and still meet all 4 requirements? And then usually if I'm in the room with people, I'll say, how many people think it takes at least 8 pages? And a bunch of hands go up. How many think you could do it in 5? And maybe a couple people go. I say 3. And then they kind of, all the hands disappear. People go, no. I said 2, 1. Then everybody starts shaking their head, right? There's no way that you could do a quality manual, on a single sheet of paper, right? Absolutely no way you could make that happen.
Quick question, Steve, for you.
Yeah.
They just asked, what are the 4 requirements?
Oh, there's going to be a quiz for the speaker. In a nutshell, it comes down to explaining the structure of your quality system, right? What is the process model look like? Yeah, they're going to put me on the spot. What does your documentation structure look like? I got to remember here what the other 2 are. I should come up to me because it's right here, right? I got doc structure, I got roles. Oh yeah, clarifying roles and responsibilities. And the 4th one, I'm drawing a blank, so I should have been ready for this one. I apologize. But they're not particularly difficult. And that's what you're seeing here in this trifold brochure. This has got a combination of those 4 requirements plus some additional things that I just think are good to have, like a quality policy. You're required under 1345 to have a quality policy. It never says put it in the quality manual, but I'm a fan of going, well, where else would I put it? right? If this is the start of my quality system, then why not put the quality policy first and foremost in there? Yeah, defining what the scope of my quality system is. Things like applicable standards and regs can help. On the back page is the diagram of how are we structuring this quality system in terms of how the processes fit together. You can see the documentation architecture. And in this company, it's a multi-divisional company, and we're showing a functional organization chart, right? To say this is how things go together and how they report, and a reminder of who's got what responsibilities, all on a trifold brochure. And I know what the next question usually is on this. Well, wait a minute. Will this pass an audit? Yes, it absolutely has passed an audit. I've implemented this at several companies, whether it's 9001, 1345, and FDA inspectors have seen this as well. Every one of them has loved this. I actually had an auditor at that same company that had the 39-page quality manual. Over the course of a year, I restructured everything and I did this. And the next time we had an auditor show up and he asked for the quality manual and I handed him the brochure. He opened it up, looked at it for a second, and he looked at me and he said, finally, right? Somebody understood the intent of the quality manual. It's not a regurgitation of the entire quality system. It's the introduction to your quality system. It's the roadmap to your quality system. You can apply this thinking on lots of other types of documents besides your quality manual, to that point of, notice a lot of pictures here. There's still some words. I could probably get more of them out of there, but it gets you that new mindset. Go ahead.
So a little bit confusing question for me, but maybe you can understand. Auditors may, but what about customers? Many times the manuals include more about overall structure and business model.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Yeah, I guess the auditors may appreciate the leaner manual, but what about customers? Many times the manuals include more about overall structure and business model. So maybe speaking to not just
I've not run into that as a problem with customers either. They usually, okay, I understand this, right? If the client wants to understand more of the specifics about what's going on in the quality system, usually as part of their supplier management process, they're either going to hit you with a questionnaire to get more of that detail, or they're going to do an audit, right? Either remotely or on site, at which time then you can take them through, all right, here's how we validate processes if that's what we're looking for. But I'm not a fan of repeating information place within the quality system. And that's what happens in a lot of quality manuals is well, a lot of times we just repeat the standard back, which is completely non-value added, or we repeat stuff that's going to be in the SOP itself, and now it's in two places and we know what happens then. One of them gets updated and the other doesn't. Good questions. We are running long here. I have one more section to go through, so I understand if people will drop off. I hope some people will stick around for the remaining 10 minutes probably that it'll take to go to the next section. Anyway, I'm challenging you to rethink the content of your documents. There are better ways, more effective ways. And there are ways where you could split up variations of documents, I suppose, if you have a particular type of client or even a particular client who wants to see things a certain way. You could always create a variant of certain documents that are targeted to a specific audience. All right, last section is all about the habits. Okay. To be able to lead without authority is really about the habits versus the authorization to do so. If you think about guerrilla leaders, they just sort of emerge. They don't get elected, they just become natural leaders that people want to follow. And that's usually because they have the behaviors. They are seen as leaders. That's the perception of them, that of course I'd follow this person, into the trenches, because of the way in which they handle themselves. So again, you don't need a title. You can be a leader based on your thoughts, your education, your knowledge, right? A technical or subject matter expert is also a leader that people will look to and follow. Sometimes it's about how you bring others together that makes you a leader. You don't necessarily have the answers, but you know how to put the two people together that will be able to come up with the answer. That's another form of making yourself, seen as a leader. So it comes down to your habits and whether you exhibit the habits of a leader. I based this on, there was a book that came out a long time ago, is still in print, still very popular, still considered one of the best business books ever written, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you've never read it, I suggest getting it. There's also classes you can take. You don't have to take classes, but I'd read the book. It's an easy read. And Stephen Covey just had some really good ideas about how to, be more effective. And he created this model, right, where he said, well, there are the 7 habits, but there's these maturity stages you go through from where you are. When you're not particularly mature, you're dependent on others, and then you just kind of strive to get independent of others, and then eventually you realize you have to work through others, and there has to be an interdependence, right? Teamwork is really what it comes down to. And I said, you know what? I wonder if we could come up with something that is more applicable to quality leadership, more specific to it. And I was able to do this, which was, I said, yeah, it's about in quality leadership, we tend to move, in stages from trying to control things to managing things to being a leader, right? And then I changed the 7 habits as well, and I'll touch on each of them briefly here in a second. But right, as the lower half of the diagram, right, first we usually focus on our individual success, right? We're worried about our personal perception and our own risk tolerance. You want to be viewed as a good manager, right? You feel like you're a good manager when you do these things, right? And you apply these first 3 habits that I'll get into on the next slide. Ultimately, you start to realize, right, if I want to be successful and I want to move up or, be given, I don't want to call it power, but, given that authority as a recognized leader, I have to focus on things like organizational success. So I've learned now I have to not just focus on me. I have to think about there are stakeholders, there's the management, there's the rest of the quality team. I have to be able to demonstrate that the QMS is not a necessary burden. It's a value provider to the business. I want to create confidence in the people within the organization across the stakeholders, right? So that they don't, especially like the quality organization, that we're not just a burden, right? That has to be here because the reg says so, but because we actually do provide value and it's understood, so that the quality org becomes respected rather than feared. And this is where the habits 4 through 6 come through. So to move from the controlling, right, to the managing levels of maturation, habit 1, I call it's a system. The standards, both 9001, 1345, and just about anything else, because it's usually based on 9001, talks about a process model or a process approach. You can't just have the old school thinking of, I have a list of procedures, every one of those matches with a requirement to have a documented procedure, so I'm good, and there's no interconnectivity in those things. A system and a process implies interaction and that I understand those interactions. If you've not taken the time to map that out and understand it and then teach that back to everybody, everybody's putting their blinders on and they're doing their thing with no knowledge about what the rest of the system is doing. You're sub-optimizing at best, hopefully, but that's going to possibly work against other things that they're connected to. Habit number 2, all hands on deck, right? The old quality isn't just quality's responsibility. You do have to help people understand how they participate in the quality system. How do you get them to truly engage, right? Well, that's what we have a quality department for, right? Just throw it to them. They'll take care of this. I don't have to worry about this. You need to get people understanding their role in processes, their ownership of activities and processes, right? And get them to understand this is mine, to the point where they almost kind of go, quality, I don't need you for this. This is my process, and I understand what you need me to do, right? And you can certainly get my metrics, but I'll take care of defining my process and managing my process, right? You kind of want to get to that kind of thinking. Habit 3, don't just monitor, you have to analyze. Right? There's another great Deming quote. The data are not taken for museum purposes. They are taken as the basis for doing something. I don't know how many companies I go into when I'm doing assessments or audits about their metrics and they're collecting data. And then I ask the question, so what do you do with that data? And then I get the tilted head, right? And they go, well, it said we had to measure, so we're measuring. I said, yeah, but you have to monitor, which implies you do something with that information. But it's amazing how often data just gets collected for the sake of collecting it so they can check off, yes, we are measuring, right? The plan, do, check, act kind of thinking, which is built into every quality system model, is that you then need to take that, assess it, evaluate it, and determine what does that mean you need to do next to make some changes. So if all you're doing is collecting data and it goes nowhere, one, you're probably wasting people's time if they're collecting it manually, or you're missing huge opportunities, right, to make great improvements. And then, right, we've gotten to that managing level of maturity. How do I get to be a leader? Okay. It is all about requirements. first, last, and always. If you don't know the requirements, don't nail those down, that they're the right requirements. That's all the requirements. They're clear, they're concise, they don't conflict, which is all in the standards and regs, by the way, that you're supposed to do that with requirements. But if you don't know what the requirements are, then you're guessing at everything else, and your results are highly likely not to be what you expected. Not that you can define what was to be expected because you didn't define the requirements well, right? Getting the requirements nailed down first and spending time on that is worth what it will save you at the end. And then I mentioned the plan, do, check, act, right? Habit 5 is right? You have to make sure people understand quality isn't an accident, right? This basically gets to, you can't inspect quality in. There has to be a plan. How are we going to do this? Then we follow the plan. We get that data, we analyze it, we act on it, and we update the plan, do things a little differently, right? And that's that PDCA cycle that we should all be embracing. And that's what's implied in the standards and regs when they talk about taking a process approach. They mean plan, do, check, act as a process. And then habit 6, talked about earlier, about how are you going to get people above you to take on the risks, or even if you do get to a point where you need their permission, right, their blessing, it's understanding how to speak to that level. The language of management is dollars. In quality, we'd love to talk about all kinds of other things, CPKs and histograms and all this other type of data that is wonderful and important and valuable to us. But then you show it to management and their eyes glaze over, right? And you'll hear management say, I don't think quality understands business. And of course, on the other end, the lower levels, everybody's going, management's, they're idiots. They don't seem to understand the importance of quality. It's because we're talking two different languages. You can, again, convert all of this into, what does this mean dollar-wise, right? And typically you would want to think in terms of things like cost of poor quality. That usually hammers it home. These things into, well, here's what it saves us, right? Or here's where it creates an opportunity for us. You will get management's attention and increase your likelihood that you'll actually will get permission from this. And then habit 7 is the same as Covey said. Ultimately, great, you can go through this progression, you've matured, you're a leader now, it doesn't stay static for you. The knowledge moves on, the variability of what's going on in the business goes on, and day to day, you have to keep learning. I'm hoping that's why you're here today, right? Is that you want to increase your learning. You've got to stay sharp. Covey called it sharpening the saw, right? I just remind you, don't be a hobbyist, be a professional. Professionals go out and they get certifications and they get involved with different organizations and they stay on top of, whatever's being posted, and they read white papers, right? There's lots of different ways that you can keep that learning going. All right, key takeaways here real quick. Again, I'm not going to tell you how much risks you should take on and when you should jeopardize your job, but I've just found it's worked better for me to ask for forgiveness than for permission. But again, you do it the right way, there's not going to be anything to apologize for. Actually, they're going to want you to explain how it can be done again. Again, people handle change better when it's subtle. Sneak it in there, sneak those vegetables in there. Or there's the old thing about, right, if you slowly increase the water temperature versus plunging something into boiling water, the reaction is usually a lot different. Watch how you're doing your measurements carefully, correctly. Again, this is part of where some of those negative perceptions of the quality department come from, because they're always asking us to take on something that's interfering or is just going to be used to fire me or something like that. You got to get past those measurement fears. Right? There's the KISS principle. Keep it simple, short and simple. Less words and documents will be more effective. You may have to figure out how to change your change control process, but it can be done, and it can be done very effectively. And remember, as a leader, you must evolve. And if anything else, you need to subordinate yourself to the quality system, which hopefully has addressed all these other things. And if they see you bowing to the QMS God, they will follow suit and understand that it will work and it will provide value. Raquel, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Steve. We're kind of over time a little bit, but we're going to try to answer a few remaining questions. Before we do, if you'd like to connect with Steve, here's his information, his email. You can connect with him on LinkedIn. Also, please register for our next webinar, The Ultimate Guide to Risk Mitigation for Manufacturers, on June 27th. You can register at intellect.com. If you'd like to see a demo of our QMS software, please type in the word demo into the Q&A panel. We'll reach out to you as soon as possible after today's webinar, or you can scan your the QR code and be directed to our requested demo page. I kind of went through it there, but if you have a colleague who could benefit from a QMS at their company, we have our Share and Receive referral program. You can earn up to $5,000 if they become a customer of Intellect. All right, we'll answer a few remaining questions. Thank you everyone for remaining with us. Let's see here. Suggestion, Steve, on where to find a compressed one-page quality manual, for example.
I'm happy to provide my example if people would like. I can make that available to Raquel. When they publish the slides, we can publish a PDF of that so you can see what it looks like.
Okay, perfect. If a company has never monitored quality in dollars and cents, how do you create those? Is there a resource that you can recommend where we can go and use?
Yeah, I mean, Google, right? There's all kinds of great stuff out there. The American Society for Quality, ASQ.org, they have some good write-ups on cost of quality there. But there are some good white papers out there if you just Google, right? Techniques for, measuring the unmeasurable, things like that. Or just Google cost of poor quality. And you will find some good writing on creative ways to capture that when it's not necessarily obvious.
All right. We're getting a lot of, thank you, Steve. Everyone really enjoyed your presentation. So we'll end with this last question. It's a little bit technical here. We have a QMS with ASME Section 3, NCA 3300-4200, and ISO 9001, plus MIL-I-452088. Could we still use a TRIFLE manual?
So I'm not familiar with that particular ASME reference, and I'm familiar with mil specs, but I don't know which one that one specifically. But you mentioned 9001. Yeah, I mean, right, all of these things, mil specs, ASME standards, somewhere they can all trace their lineage back to 9001. So if you're meeting, right, which is the general quality requirements, and then they get more specific in the ASME and MIL and IEEE or whatever other additional standards you put in there. And yeah, I just find that anybody who's inspecting to that, they just want to understand your quality system really quickly. And they understand those basic requirements that used to be in 9001 or definitely in 1345. And they don't want to scan through 20 pages to try to understand how is your quality system laid out, because they understand you're going to have procedures. And when they have specific questions about how you handling lab management, that's going to be in a lab management procedure. How are you handling non-conformances? You'll have a non-conforming management procedure. So they just want to understand, how is it all connected? Do you understand how it's all connected? And I've just found it goes over really well, regardless of who the audience is. And that includes going through customer audits as well.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Steve, very much for the wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone for hanging on a few more minutes. Please join us at Intellect's next webinar next month. Thank you.